I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 6. I'm excited about, as we announced Wednesday night, talked to you a little Wednesday night, we're starting a new section, a new paragraph, which is chapter 6, verse 5, down through verse 14, which focuses basically on prayer. Jesus' discourse on prayer as found in the Sermon on the Mount. And it is revealing, to say the least. Before we get into the sermon this morning, I'd like to preface it with some statements, so this is not a part of the sermon. The Sermon on the Mount comes at a period in Jesus' life which is somewhat at the beginning of his ministry, like maybe after 6 months of his ministry. They have moved into Galilee, and he has set up his headquarters there, and he's begun to minister in that area away from Jerusalem. Great crowds are following him, and he's not really impressed with the crowds at this point, and that will increase. But as he begins the Sermon on the Mount, he is speaking, if you look at chapter 5, verse 1, directly to his disciples. It says, seeing the multitudes, they were there, no question about that. In chapter 5, verse 1, seeing the multitudes, he went up on a mountain, and when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he opened his mouth and taught them. So the indication is that he was speaking directly to his disciples. And the idea of the Sermon on the Mount is, hey guys, I want you to know what you're getting yourself into. You've become my disciples, you're all thrilled about the miracles and the feeding of the 5,000 and all this stuff that's going on. And I want you to know where we're moving to, where this is headed, and what you've really, if you want to be my disciple, what you're really setting yourself up for. And the Sermon on the Mount is a display of that. And it is a contrast between the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is over here. They have known all about that, the sacrifices, the ceremonies, the doing, the schedules, the prayer times, they've gone through all that, the temple, all that's been involved in that. They know all about that. Their lives have been steeped in that. He says now we're moving not out of that or away from that, but that is all being fulfilled into a new level. So something brand new is going to happen. It's like you put all the ingredients of the cake on the table. And hey, there's the flour, and there's the sugar, and there's the whatever, and there's the fruit or whatever, and you got it all laid out, and it all looks good. And you've been looking at the counter with all the stuff laid out. But guys, we're putting it all together now. We're mixing it up. We're baking the thing, and woo, you're going to get into the cake. Woo, it is a new deal. It's not new in the fact that we've added anything. It's new in the fact that the whole thing is fulfilled and taken to a new level. See, you've gathered all the parts together, and hey, here's this part over here, and oh, that part there, and here's this part here. But now we're going to take the parts and we're going to put them all together, and you're actually going to have the object itself, the real deal. You know what the book of Hebrews calls this? The book of Hebrews talks about the shadow. We've lived in the shadows. Now, guys, we've moved into the real thing. The real substance is here, and Jesus is the real substance. Paul talks about the same thing in Colossians. The shadow compared to the real substance. So Jesus is saying, hey guys, you've experienced, and he's talking to them in their perspective and viewpoint. You've experienced all the Old Testament and all the ingredients, and it's all been laid out on the counter, but hey, we're baking the cake, guys. We're baking the cake, and you're going to sit down at the table, and boy, is it good. We're moving to a whole new deal. And the Sermon on the Mount is an explanation of that whole new deal. Now, what he's done in chapter 5 is he's given 6 illustrations of this as they applied to life. Now he's come to chapter 6 and said, hey, let's apply this to religion, which was right down their alley. And every religion has 3 things. Number 1 has charitable deeds, generosity. Number 2 has some kind of communication with God, which is prayer. And number 3 has to do with spiritual disciplines, which in this case he talks about fasting. So he's applying it in this section to prayer. And what he's saying is, hey, the ingredients, but now we've baked the cake. What do you think this does to prayer? What have you been involved in prayer? Well, we've had the prayer times. We've observed them every day. Yeah, 9 in the morning, noon, and 3 in the afternoon. And we stop and we pray all those times. Okay. Hey, and we repeat words that are, phrases that are important to us. Okay. So we talk, we say things. Yeah, well, that's good. So we go through this. What will this new deal do to that? How will it transform it? How will that, if that's an ingredient of the cake, now that we're going to sit down and eat the cake, what will prayer be like? And he's describing that in this passage. Now, our purpose today is, and I'm going to have to hurry, our purpose today is we want to look at the entire section. And then next Sunday, of course, we'll come back and we'll start in on verse 1, and we'll begin to walk through it. But this is an overall perspective of the whole discourse that he gives on prayer, which of course includes the instruction of the Lord's Prayer. So look at chapter 6, verse 5. It says, "And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the corners of the streets, that they may be seen by men. Assuredly, I say to you, they have their reward. But you, when you pray," this is the new deal, "go into your room. When you shut the door, pray to your Father who's in the secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. And when you pray, do not use vain repetitions as the heathen do, for they think they will be heard for their many words. Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things you have need of before you even ask him. In this manner, therefore, pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. And if you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." In the preaching class, I talked to the guys about don't use personal illustrations because it becomes a bragging thing. So use biblical illustrations because you constantly are bringing people back to the scriptures. So, guys, I'm breaking my own rule. I was at Southbourne High School. Some of you have heard this, but I was at Southbourne High School. And I was in a spiritual struggle. I was raised in the church. Dad was a pastor. Every revival, I was at the altar. I'd been forgiven by God at least 25 times. Maybe 30, maybe 50, maybe 100. But it was a roller coaster experience. It was up, I'd have, and hey, I would feel and experience, and then it wouldn't. And basically it had to do with myself and peer pressure. And, you know, you go to school and, hey, you want to fit in and you want to be a part, and you compromise, and before you know it, hey, you're... So at this particular point in my life, Southbourne High School, I was sick of this. And there were no religious services going on, no quartet singing, no special music, no special preaching. I left the lunch hour at the high school, and our church was right across the street from the high school. So I left, I skipped the lunchtime, and I went to the church. And I didn't go to the altar. I went down into a Sunday school classroom and shut the door where I knew nobody would bother me, even if they came in, and I would be alone. And I didn't kneel. I looked up into the ceiling, and I said, God, I've had it. This is it. You're either real or you aren't real. You can either change my life or you can't change my life. I'm either in or I'm out. Hey, I'm done. And you're going to be real in my life, or hey, I'm going to look someplace else. So if you want to do something in my life, this is your opportunity. I'm pulling the pin on you. And it was at that moment that a lightning bolt came right out of the corner of the room and struck me right in the chest and burned my shirt. I've still got the shirt, so I'd remember. No. In fact, the very opposite happened. Because you see, if a lightning bolt would come, I would have said, well, maybe I better go back there tomorrow and see if I can get two. You know, you want to be sure about this stuff. See, that's the sign-seeking deal. And maybe that was what my problem had been all the time, because I was operating on feelings and what would God, and I want you to prove yourself and all this stuff. Anyhow, I walked out of there. I didn't feel any different than I always felt. I didn't feel his presence. I didn't hear his voice. There was nothing. I walked in, said that, walked out. That was the sum total of it. But guys, over a period of a month to 2 months, God began to do something. Yeah, in my heart, but it was more than my heart, it was my head. I began to understand some things I'm stupid, I'm as dumb as a rock, but somehow he put some things in my brain. Something began to click reasonably, sensibly, of how this really works in my life and what the problem had been. And I began to realize that Jesus was a real, live, functioning individual. That he's not the force, he's not influence, he's not love, more love, he's not the wind blowing through the trees. He's a real live guy, and that what Christianity is meeting face to face this living Jesus and having him actually move through the pores of my skin and get inside my body and dwell within me. And that as a Christian, and I began to realize this over a period of a couple months, I began to realize that Jesus was actually walking in my flesh. He was actually living in here. And if you say, well, where does he live in here? I ask you, where do you live in here? See, I don't know whether I'm up here or whether I'm in my big toe. But wherever I am, he is. And he has actually invaded my flesh, and that I am not alone anymore. And in that realization, the whole thing began to turn in my life, because I began to develop what I call a God awareness. I began to think in terms of Jesus is participating moment by moment in my life. That Christianity became not having my devotions in the morning and then coming back at the end of the day reporting to him how my day went. Jesus was actually involved in my day, functioning in my, and everything my hand was doing, he was doing. And I began to realize every single time that I had a God awareness, I was aware of him. I just mentally aware of Jesus in my life. Wow, I had victory. And when I was not aware of him, I didn't have victory. I was into defeat. So obviously what I needed to do was have a daily, moment by moment involvement with in relationship and communication with the Jesus who lived within me. Now, if he's off in the sky someplace, then I'm going to have to yell to get his attention. But if he actually has come to move within me and shares my mind, then my thought is a prayer. That I can walk down the high school hall and I don't have to get on my knees and raise my hand and yell. I can literally in my mind say, thank you, Jesus, stick with me. And he gets that because he's in my brain. And that I could saturate him. That's where the idea of saturation came. I could saturate in him. I could develop a God awareness. I could always have him present. I set up all kinds of things in my life to try to develop that God awareness. For instance, every time the bell rang in high school, I made myself stop and be aware that Jesus, you live within me. Well, you know how many times a bell rings. Man, all day long, I'm being aware of him. I began to have so much fun with that because every time I tried to change my language from I to we. I'm going downtown. No, we are going downtown. Who's this we? Well, Jesus and me. It's no longer an I, it's an us thing. Man, that's hard to change your language. I began to try, every time the bell rang, I tried to change my life. Every time I had a problem, I began to bring that problem to him, big, small. I wanted him to be involved in everything that's going on in my life. So, hey, Lord, help me make this basket. I played basketball. So help me make this basket. Hey, Lord, that's a good-looking girl on the street corner. See, just involving him. Boy, these are good green beans, Lord. Just every aspect of my life, just dragging him into that situation so that nothing is going on in my life that he is not involved in. Now, I got so excited about this over a period of months. This began to develop in my life. I got so excited about this, thinking that I'd invented a new thing. And then God began to bring me these books. I have no idea how it all happened. Can't tell you to this day. But some books began to show up. And I got a hold of this book called Practicing His Presence by a guy by the name of Brother Lawrence, who was a monk in the 1600s who did this same thing. Whoa, I thought I invented it. And here this guy in the 1600s was a monk in a monastery, and he worked in the kitchen. His responsibility as a monk was work in the kitchen. And he would write, my elders say, the bishop and so forth, the priests say, I have to spend time at the altar in prayer. And hey, I have no problem doing that because God is there at the altar in prayer. But he said God is just as real in the kitchen as he is at the altar. And he was talking about this practicing his presence, this living in the flow of all that God is. Wow. Then I began to read stuff in the scriptures like Paul said, pray. That's an imperative. Oh, yes, I got to do that. Well, what do you mean? Pray. Okay. You're talking about on my knees? How long? How much? Well, the most effective prayer is at 3 a.m. in the morning. God hears better then because everything is quiet. And if you really want to do it right, you get a metal chair. You put it in the kitchen. And your family's your kids are in bed and your wife's asleep. And you crawl out of bed at 3 a.m. You go down to the kitchen. You get this metal chair. And about every 5 words, you wham that chair just as hard as you can. Wham! And you scream at the top of your lungs because God can't hear. So, whoa! Oh, God of the sky! Whoa! Is that prayer? And how are you going to do that without ceasing? In fact, prayer is an imperative in that statement. It's 1 Thessalonians. Pray without ceasing. And without ceasing is an adverb giving content to the prayer thing. So what he's really saying is pray without remitting. Pray incessantly. Pray permanently. Pray continually. Pray without intermission. How am I going to do that if I have to be on my knees? Well, you can't. So I'm going to pray at my job. I'm going to pray while I drive. You mean you're just going to keep talking to God well, not exactly talk, but there's this awareness of Him and the involvement of Him and the communication, because we're moving to a new level. See, all you've known is prayer times, 9 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, noon. See, you've known and you stop, oh yes, God of the sky. See, the big man upstairs, that concept is now gone. And Jesus says we're moving into a whole new level where He's literally going to live within us, and we're going to be in such a communication that we act as one, we think as one. Did you ever tell God the latest joke? Well, sure you did. When you told it, when you thought it, you told it because He heard it, because He's in your brain. Do you know what we're doing right now? Praying. You think He's not involved in this? That He hasn't come to say things to you that I can't say or won't say or am unable to say or too dumb to say? That this is an involvement of this. And it's interesting, the word prayer that's given to us in our passage beginning at verse 5, when you pray, that word, it's used 6 times in this particular discourse. Jesus uses this word prayer, so it really is important. It's interesting that this word prayer, if you study the Gospels, the disciples never ever did this in the Gospels. They never did this. Now, maybe they did and it wasn't recorded. Okay. But it's never recorded that the disciples ever prayed. What do you mean they didn't pray? They had the 9 in the morning, the noon. I know, they did that thing, whatever that was. That shadow thing. They did that. But they never did this until Acts. And then they moved into this whole new level. And they saw it in Jesus. They saw Jesus doing this thing. In fact, in Luke, they came to Jesus and said, wow, there's something, when you pray, we do 9, noon, but you do, something's going on. Could you teach us what you do? Could you help us understand what you're doing? We teach us how to pray like you pray. They ask him in Luke. Now you understand, this brings us back to the premise of the Sermon on the Mount. And what is the premise of the Sermon on the Mount? Well, it's the Beatitudes. And you can't understand any of this in any of the Sermon on the Mount without this premise. You have to see everything through this premise. And what's the premise? Well, he starts right out with, blessed are the poor in spirit. And we've discovered the word poor is the strongest Greek word for poverty. So it's absolutely no resource. And it's in the spirit that you have no resource. In other words, if I slice you down the middle, go to the core of your existence, what makes you tick, what drives you, your attitude, what forms you, what literally produces you, if I go there, what do I find? Absolutely nothing, because you're helpless. You are totally helpless. You are helpless to form your attitude. You are helpless to determine how you react. You're helpless, which is why, guys, we always say, well, I just couldn't help it. What do you mean you couldn't help it? I didn't have the resource within me to keep from doing that. Yes, I doubled up my fist and socked him in the mouth. I just reacted. I couldn't stop myself. What are you saying? You're saying I'm absolutely helpless inside to keep my anger under control. And I've gone to anger management class 5 times. So, I just can't do it. It's an impossibility. Why? Because I'm absolutely helpless in the gut of my life. What produces me, I am helpless. So Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount gives this premise. You're absolutely helpless. Well, if I'm absolutely helpless, what am I going to do? Oh, he wants to come. He wants to come, and he wants to literally merge with you. And we've talked about this and talked about this. Oh, you got to get this. I just love to talk about this. I'm helpless. He is the resource. And he in his person is literally going to come and merge with me. Not touch me, not counsel me, not aid me, not help me through a tough spot, not strengthen me for a moment, not a Band-Aid. See, he's going to come and merge so that who I am and who he is literally become, and we saturate each other with each other. And it becomes not me, not him, but us. And in this us, you know what that would do to prayer? Suddenly I'm not just on my knees beating a metal chair, crying at the top of my lungs. Suddenly I'm living with, I'm walking with. I'm finding resource and strength in my life. I'm finding direction. I'm thinking stuff that I've never thought before. I'm feeling things I've never felt before. Something's going on. It's not something, it's someone is going on inside of me. And prayer is taken on, wow, a living communication moment by moment by moment as I'm, prayers move from the old 3 times a day stuff. It's moved from, the God of Mount Sinai, he's coming down in lightning and thunder, scaring us half to death. Moses, you go talk to him. We don't want anything to do with this. It's gone from that to our Father. Wow. And a whole new level of intimacy and oneness. Again, he's no longer the big man upstairs. See, that whole hotline to heaven. Hey, God, are you listening? Never get a busy signal. You remember that song? No. Too young. Wow. That was stupid. That was absolutely a stupid song. Why? Because it's See, we want to maintain prayer in an Old Testament system. We like the doing activity of the prayer to, hey, I check it off. I prayed at 9, I prayed at noon, I prayed at 3. Woo, aren't I something? Kind of, which is exactly what Jesus is talking about in the passage. The prayer is now moving to a whole new deal. Now, come to our passage, and I want to try to break this down for you a little bit. But if you look at verse 5 and verse 6, we're calling that section concentration, the concentration of prayer. Now, he uses the word prayer 4 times in those 2 verses, 5 and 6. Uses it 4 times. The word prayer is an interesting word because it's a devotional term. It's not an activity term, it's a devotional term. If you don't turn there, but if you would go to 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 1, you will find the basic biblical words for prayer used in that verse. All 3 of them are used there. One is supplication. And supplication is requesting things. So you come to God and you request something in prayer. Okay, that's a word that's used for prayer. But that word is also used for talking to each other. I request something from you. So it's a supplication thing. Then there's the word prayer, and so there's supplication and prayer and intercession. The word intercession, of course, is a strong, beefed up requesting. It's a desperation requesting. It's a wringing your hands requesting. And right in the middle of supplication and intercession is this idea of prayer. And prayer, again, is a devotional term. The best illustration for this devotional aspect of prayer is the idea that Jesus proposed in the Gospels. He came into the temple, and you remember the story, he cleaned house. There was this large porch all the way around the temple, and there was all kinds of selling going on. You had to buy a lamb, you could buy the oil, you could buy the salt, you could buy the pigeons, you could buy the, and it was all things that were used in the temple, and they were making a mint off of that. Jesus came in. They had their own temple police, by the way, but those police didn't stop Jesus. Jesus came in, formed a whip, a cord into a whip, and he started in, and man, he broke boards over his knee. He turned stands upside down. There were the money changers there. He tipped tables over, money's well, he opened cages, and doves started flying out, and lambs are running all over the place. He tore the place up, went around the whole square of the temple and tore the place up. Took him some time. And when he got done, he stood up in the temple and said, "You wonder why I did this? You think I'm mad. I'm not mad. I'll tell you why I did it. My house will be a house of prayer. And you've made it a den of thieves, and I won't have it. And nothing is going to go on in this place, the temple. Nothing will take place in this place. Nothing is going to happen in this place but prayer." Now think about it. God ordained that there would be a lot of things that would take place in the temple. For instance, they offered sacrifices. Well, that's not on your knees beating a metal chair. Come on. The Israelite men would get together and sing the Psalms. Well, singing is not prayer. Beating a metal chair, screaming at the top of your lungs. Oh, they had great fellowship in the temple. It was the meeting place of the town. I got that. But hey, fellowship is not prayer. Come on. We have a potluck. We have dinner at 5:30 on Wednesday. That's not prayer. We pray before we eat, but hey, it's not prayer. Eating is not prayer. So why are they doing all that in the temple then? Why are they having fellowship in the temple? Why are they praising and worshiping in the temple? Why are they... Jesus said, "I'm not going to have anything going on here but prayer." Because he's not talking about an Old Testament concept of prayer. He's not talking about 9, noon, 3. He's not talking about a metal chair yelling to the God of the sky. He's not talking about that. What's he talking about? He's talking about an intimacy with God whereby you and I have entered in such a communication that everything we do ends up to be worship and involvement and intimacy and oneness with who he is. Wow. And that's what he called prayer. That prayer was a devotional thing. So worship is prayer. Fellowship is prayer. Caring for you is prayer. Going to my job and working for the glory of God is prayer. So if he is involved, there is an intimacy that's going on that is so much bigger than just getting on your knees and beating a metal chair. Paul said this, do you not know? He really nailed it. Do you not know that you are the temple? You are the temple of God. And that the Spirit of God dwells in you. Well, if Jesus said nothing's going to go on in the temple but prayer, and you're the temple, my house will be a house of prayer, and nothing will go on in this temple, this house, but prayer. And you're the house? But see, I've been a house of lust. Nothing went on in my life but lust. See, I've been a house of addiction. I've been a house of anger. Lots of things have been going on in this house. Wouldn't it be something if he could literally, oh, this would be a whole new, this would be the cake. This wouldn't be ingredients on the counter. This would be the cake. This wouldn't be the shadow. This would be, if he could literally come within me and he and I could be in such intimate communication that I was always praying. Now he states that in verse 5 and 6 vividly in several ways, and we only got time to do one. One is the hypocrite idea. He says, when you pray, you should not be like the hypocrites. Why were they hypocrites? Because a hypocrite is one who acts one way when he's really another way. So here's a hypocrite, a guy who's standing and he's praying to God. That's what he indicates. He's praying to God because that's what prayer is, communication with God. So I'm communicating, I'm praying to God. But all the time I'm praying to God, I'm not really praying to God. I'm doing it to be seen by men. Therefore, I'm not praying to God, I'm praying to you. So I appear to be praying to God, but I'm really praying to you. So I'm a hypocrite. So the communication of focus is not with you. That's what he said. Enter into your room. Shut the door, man. Go to the secret place. Why? Because you have nothing to do with my prayer. The prayer that's going on inside of me is the prayer that's in the secret place, the intimate place, the communication place where God and I have we connect. And in that connection, I'm living in him, and his heart and my heart are beating together, and there's something going on in God awareness in my life that causes everything in my life to be prayer. Now, when he gets done with this communication idea in verse 5 and 6, he moves to the content of prayer. He says, if you're going to communicate to God, what should be the content? And in verse 7 down through verse 13, he gives this phenomenal content, which includes, of course, the Lord's Prayer. And you'll note in verse 7, he says, and when you pray, do not use vain repetitions. The word repetition, it's the only time, by the way, it's used in the whole New Testament. That word right there, only time that word shows up, vain repetitions. Which is significant. And it's literally, in the Greek, it's two words put together. The first word is stutter. The second word is logos, which is word. So it's stuttering your words. It's the idea of just saying it over and over and over. And he indicates that, for they think they will be heard for their many words. So it's speech without purpose. It's speech without, it's just mouthing off. We do a lot of that, don't we? We're good at it, aren't we? Just mouthing off. So in our prayer, what are we doing? Just mouthing off. Well, but I have needs. And when you go into the Lord's Prayer, the whole Lord's Prayer, look at that thing. The whole Lord's Prayer is what? Requesting. Oh, Father, let your name be hallowed. Oh, Father, your kingdom come. Let your will be done. See, those are requests. Oh, Father, daily bread stuff. Father, forgive us. Father, what this temptation thing? Oh, Father. See, the whole Lord's Prayer is a request. So when you put that in the context of what he's saying in verse 7, he's saying, hey, guys, don't be like the heathen. The content of your prayer should not be whining. Want some cheese with your wine? See, it shouldn't be, come on. Your prayer life is a whining, whimpering. Oh, come on, God. You act like a 4-year-old, man. You act like a 4-year-old, or a 6-year-old that says, hey, if you don't give me what I want, to your parents, if you don't give me what I want, I'm going to run away from home. That's the level of the 9, the noon, the 3. That's the ingredients. What would happen if you would come into intimacy with the Father and you and him would be so one that you didn't have to whine because he already knows your needs? You could lay back in his arms. You could just fellowship in his presence. You could just be, request. It's okay. Jesus told us we could ask. There's no problem with that. But the attitude of your requesting and the attitude with which you approach intimacy with him is one of what? Helplessness. See, you don't need to ask him, oh God, give me this so I can do this. Why? Because if he gave it to you, you couldn't do it because you're helpless. So see, this is not, he's going to aid you. He's going to help you. He's going to come to your rescue. He's going to give you, he will solve this problem, then I'll be okay, Lord. No, you won't. He could solve all your problems and you still wouldn't make it. You'd go out and create more. Why? Because you're helpless. So what do you need? You need him in the merger. And in the merger, so you don't need to whine and bellyache and bargain and what you need is to enter into intimacy and oneness and all your requests come out of this attitude of absolute helplessness and leaning on him. And the Lord's Prayer is all about asking, yes, but it's about asking in an attitude of, oh God, we're desperate for the fulfillment of your heart in us. So see, he's taking us, do you get it? He's taking us to a whole new level where our communication is such an intimate communication. It's not beating a metal chair, crying at the top of our lungs. It's a walking in the intimacy of his presence all day long. And everything we do, somehow he's in the middle of it. And it's a communication with him and him alone. And we don't do anything we do that he isn't present and infiltrating and influencing. And in that intimacy and in that merger, we have the content of constant helplessness that just cries out in surrender and yieldedness, and which creates intimacy and oneness, and we begin to develop knowing his heart. Well, I'm hesitating because there's verse 14 and 15 then, which is really a strange twist. And our time is gone, but the commentary, this is the commentary idea. So we said now the communication level is going to change because you're going to be intimate, and that's going to determine the content, not the words, not the phrases, but the attitude of the content, and whining will be out and you'll be intimate. Now let me stand back and look at this with you. And he says, and give you the commentary on prayer. If you forgive men their trespasses, verse 14. If you forgive men their trespasses, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. If you do not forgive men their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. Now that's a playoff of verse 12. Do you see that? Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Now he's giving commentary to that statement. So in your prayer, you're going to be praying about forgiveness, and how does that forgiveness spill out of your system? Now he uses the word debt. Forgive us our debts. And I talked to somebody the other day they said their goal was by the time they were 50, they would be totally out of debt. I don't want to owe anything to anybody. That would be nice, wouldn't it? But not just in finances. See, I don't want to owe anything to anybody. I don't want to be obligated to you. I don't want to get in a situation where, hey, I have to because, well, I owe you. You did me a favor, I got to do you a favor. See, I don't want to do that. I don't want to owe anything to anybody. That's not this. You know what this is? I am so far into debt that I cry with the Apostle Paul, this is Romans, I am a debtor to all men. And then he described them, both to the Greeks, they're the smart people, and the barbarians. To the wise and to the unwise. I'm so far in debt that I even owe stupid people. See, come on, guys. Don't strut around like, well, I'm a self-made man. Yeah. Pick up your iPhone. How many people were involved in putting this thing together that you go down, pay for, and poke and look at during the sermon? How many? See, how? And every time you use this, you are expressing an indebtedness to the people. All the books I've read, my stars. All the things other people have, all the instruction, all the people that have poured themselves into my life. Do you realize the immensity of the debt that it's phenomenal. And then when you bring that into the context of prayer and this intimacy thing, which is the commentary on this, he's saying, hey, if you're helpless and you've literally merged with him and you're eating the cake, brother, we've moved from the 9, noon, 3, you've moved from the Old Testament shadow thing and you've moved into the reality of his presence and the wonder of, do you realize how indebted you are? Not only to him, but to everybody around you. And do you realize that in the merger, as you communicate with him, that you are indebted to literally share his presence with your world? And you owe. Why? How do you owe? You were helpless, brother. Good night. You were helpless. And he came. And when he came and you and him got together, what do you think he wants to do? So prayer has moved from the old covenant, 9, noon, 3, got that done. Standing on the street corner, being in the synagogue, and has moved into a whole new level of intimacy with God, whereby I'm communicating with him, and the content is no longer whining and trying to manipulate something out of him, but falling at his feet and being involved in destiny and purpose. And and that spills into your life from me. So I'm praying for you. Oh, Jesus. This is phenomenal. And Lord, we haven't expressed half of it. I know that. That this idea of the new covenant and what we've gotten into and the communication level with you and what we want to focus on this morning in these moments right now, Jesus, we'd like to. Would you come? See, even that, I'm sorry. Even that may not be right. Because you're here. And we're not asking the big man upstairs to come down and visit us for a moment. But would you so embrace us today? Would you take every one of us where we are? And would you just literally embrace us with your presence and communicate to us, maybe as we've never been communicated to before. We're not asking for lightning bolts out of the corner, but oh God, would you do something of your marvelous presence in our lives that would let us know that there is this amazing possibility of you, the sovereign God, and me, the helpless person, literally getting together, and that you want to be intimately involved in everything that's going on in my life. And that intimate involvement and that connection between you and me in daily living experience would be called prayer. Oh God, give us a hunger for that. And all the times we have said, well, I couldn't help myself. Could I at that moment somehow connect with you? And could it become so positive in my life and so often in my life that it would become so consistent in my life, it would become such a life pattern in my life that I would be one who would pray without intermission. Heads are bowed. If you have considered the idea of being Christian, I applaud you. But I want to do what Jesus did, set you down, and be sure you know what you're getting yourself into. Because if you thought that you were going to be a Christian and God was just going to come and pat you on the head, or God was just going to come and solve a few problems, or God was just going to come and intervene in a certain situation, or God was just going to visit you now and then, or you were just going to do the 9 in the morning, the noon, and the 3 in the afternoon thing. For you to become Christian is an invasion of your whole life with the wonder of His presence. And are you open this morning to allowing your whole life, your whole view, your whole existence to somehow be invaded, influenced, and determined by who He is? And that to become Christian is one who becomes a prayer, lives in communication with, flows in the constant flow of His presence. Wouldn't you like that? Wouldn't it be something to have a God awareness? Wouldn't it be something to live in Him all the time? Wouldn't it be something never to be alone? Never to make a decision on your own? I invite you to that kind of intimacy. Our altar's open. No pressure. Absolute volunteerism. Openness that says, Jesus, I'm in, man. Do something in me. This is my Sunday school classroom where I say, God, I'm pulling the pin. I'm done. I'm tired of messing with this. Either you're real or you're not real. Either you're in or you're not in. God, do something in my life that would bring me into an intimacy and a oneness of prayer awareness with you. Want to join us in seeking Him?